The one interesting race, though, is the New York City mayoral race. This was like an idiosyncratic thing, right? You have Zohran Mamdani, you have Andrew Cuomo, you have, the beautifully bereted Curtis Sliwa. It's kind of a rogues gallery of candidates, all of whom have enormous flaws. And my read of it is that Mamdani had the most sophisticated campaign. He was the most charismatic candidate. He didn't have the baggage of the other two candidates, namely kind of Cuomo as a relic of the past, Sliwa as a conservative, Republican, oddball.
Yeah.
And so he was able to get that magical 50% in the election. And I think it's really interesting to analyze it not as a kind of horse race phenomenon, but try to figure out, what is Mamdani symbolic of? He is something new in our politics. And kind of what were your first thoughts as you watched him rise and now clinch the victory?
Okay. Again, maybe I'm like in cope mode because I don't want this to be important, but it's like not terribly surprising. And I think Mamdani, while I don't like him at all, this isn't sort of catastrophic. Like if I'm looking for the sort of policy daylight between what he might do in New York City versus de Blasio, I think it's like pretty thin. Like I think Mamdani will go a little further and will certainly go a lot further in terms of his rhetoric. So I think like I don't want to over-index the fact that Mamdani won and won pretty significantly. Like you said, the other candidates were deeply flawed. It was like this weird race with three other potential candidates. Don't forget Eric Adams in there. And Eric Adams was weirdly the sort of most Trumpian candidate of all of them. I mean, a lot of his rhetoric towards the end, like before he dropped out, he was most sympathetic towards ICE and deportations, and he was going to follow through on a lot of the immigration stuff. The other candidates sort of waffled on those questions. Sliwa has like a long history of, opposition to Trump in particular. They're like these two sort of flamboyant New York characters who have this sort of personality feud. So Sliwa couldn't get all the way behind Trump, and Trump, of course, couldn't endorse Sliwa. He ends up endorsing Cuomo, who's this like horrible candidate, because of what he did during COVID and just kind of like boilerplate, run of the mill, time has passed him by kind of boomer lib. So Mamdani was kind of in a perfect situation. Do I think Zohran Mamdani is going to impose a kind of like communist authoritarianism on New York City? No, I don't. I think things will just kind of get incrementally worse in ways that aren't good. I think, letting people out of jails is going to be bad, and it's going to result in a lot of violence and unnecessary violence. And it's going to make just like day-to-day city living like just less appealing. It just makes the world a little bit less appealing to be in. And I don't know why anybody would want to do that other than because of the kind of sort of moral, signaling that and sort of status and pride that, libs can wallow in when they vote for someone like him. I think the key thing here, and I think this is important to say, is that Mamdani represents, above all else, a kind of post-Americanness, a post-white Americanness in particular. I think that's really important. There was a clip about from Mamdani getting passed around this morning. He's praising the Mexican abuelas and the Senegalese DoorDash drivers and so on and so forth. Not Mexican American, not Senegalese American, just those things without the hyphen at all. And I think that's important. I do also want to remind people that Zohran Mamdani made explicitly like anti-white statements during his campaign. He's talked about a sort of tax program that would explicitly tax wealthy white people, not just wealthy people, but wealthy white people. And I think that kind of normalization, which is something we've seen from the Democratic Party sort of escalating over the last decade, is the most important part of this. And it's the thing that gives me the most concern.
Yeah, I think there are two big stories about Mamdani's rise. One is about a demographic change, and the other is about an ideological change. And the demographics are really clear. If you ask, Grok, give me the ethnicity of all the mayors of New York City in the last 100 years, it's overwhelmingly Irish, Italian, and some Jewish mayors. And so that was a revolution. Originally, you had English, Dutch. You had the
Right.
original kind of founding stock of New York running the city for its first part in history. The 20th century was really about the rise of white ethnics. Irish, Italian, and Jews. Like you can trade like jokes among each other. I feel like there's a certain coherence of the new white ethnics who came to dominate New York machine politics in particular. And then this is the next thing. And if you look at the kind of demographic coalition of Mamdani, and especially if you look at the rhetorical arc of Mamdani's campaign, it's certainly about that. Although I would say this, it's important to not fall for the right-wing boomer bait to say that Mamdani is the Islamist candidate.
Yeah,
that he's going to bring Sharia law to New York City. That's not quite right. Of course, during the campaign, he did campaign openly with Islamists, including an unindicted co-conspirator of the World Trade Center bombing, whose son was arrested and prosecuted and convicted for trying to running like a terrorist training camp and recruiting school shooters. And so, yes, the unsavory characters around him. But if you look at Mamdani, and this is the second shift, the ideological shift, if you look at Mamdani's ideology, it's kind of an amalgam of all of these various left-wing ideological trends. He'll be, campaigning with Islamists, but then he'll also be tweeting that defund the police means queer liberation. He'll be hosting events with drag queens, promising a drag queen in every school. And then, he has these other incredible moments where he's seemingly endorsing an unreconstructed, pure theoretical Marxism. And one clip, and I want to get your critique not only on the ideology, but on the wardrobe and the set dressing of this clip, which I think is the perfect encapsulation of this kind of post-American, post-Western, kind of post-Marxist ideology. Let's listen to this clip from Zohran Mamdani.
What the purpose is about this entire project, it's not simply to raise class consciousness, but to win socialism. And obviously raising class consciousness is a critical part of that. But making sure that we have candidates that both understand that and are willing to put that forward at every which moment that they have, at every which opportunity that they're given. We have to continue to elect more socialists. And we have to ensure that we are unapologetic about our socialism. There are also other issues that we firmly believe in, whether it's BDS, right, or whether it's the end goal of seizing the means of production, where we do not have the same level of support at this very moment.
Yeah, as Norm Macdonald would say, that sounds like some commie gobbledygook. Okay, it's like standard boilerplate sort of new agey kind of socialist rhetoric. I don't find it all that concerning, really. I mean, again, we can sit here and go, oh my gosh, and lose our minds, like the communists are taking over New York City or something. I don't really think that's the case. I don't see a path towards implementing a project where Zohran Mamdani is leading his Mexican abuelas and Senegalese taxi drivers to seize the means of production. I don't even know what that would mean. Like, they go into BlackRock and depose Larry Fink from, his offices, and somehow they're now in charge of this sort of massive, wealth of capital or something. I don't think so. Unfortunately, what this actually means, what this actually gets interpreted into in terms of action, is more stuff like Luigi Mangione, okay? Like the psychopaths who hear this and now think the action to take to instantiate these vague abstractions is to go enact political violence. And this, anytime you see a wave of sort of communist politics in the United States, it rarely translates into something sort of like concrete. Maybe there's more robust union efforts or something, and you get like collective bargaining that is more union friendly. But what this generally means, like the most important thing this generally means is they become violent. And that's something that we've been seeing, of course, over the last 6 months to a year. We saw, the other important thing where we haven't talked about the Virginia election yet, but we also saw this in like the text messages of Jay Jones, and this kind of tacit tolerance and acceptance of the fact that there's going to be a certain amount of communist, leftist inspired violence. And so that's the thing that scares me. It's not so much like what Mamdani's going to do in terms of seizing the means of production. It's more just the stochastic actions of these psychopaths on the fringes who are sort of desperate and have no other way to exercise personal agency in the world than to be violent.